Hello, welcome back in. It's the Lions 24/7 podcast. Happy to have you with us as always. This is our second episode of Penn State's final game week of the 2024 regular season. Quick lay of the land for us on our schedule this week. No Thursday episode. Hope everyone enjoys their Thanksgiving wherever you're spending it with, whoever you're spending it with. We brought the recruiting conversation that we normally do midweek earlier into the week. Tyler Calvaruso, our recruiting insider, hopped on with us Monday, talked about some in-person interactions he had over the weekend with a couple of Penn State flip targets, where things stand there, a couple members of Penn State's current recruiting class who are being pursued by other programs ahead of the early signing period next week. And he also looked ahead to the recruiting guest list for this Saturday matchup against Maryland. Those Maryland Terrapins are in our crosshairs to start this episode. We're going to bring in Jeff Ehrman, who covers the Terps for 24/7 Sports Network. And a little bit later after that, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, my colleagues with Lions 24/7 will be back on with me. We'll break down this game week for Penn State, the significance of what the Nittany Lions are trying to accomplish this Saturday, and we'll give you our players to watch and predictions as well. But as promised, we begin with attention on opponent number 12 of the 2024 season. It's Maryland. It's a familiar opponent. They shared a division in the Big Ten for the last decade or so. Not the case anymore, but they remain on the schedule. They'll close things out here in Beaver Stadium. And Jeff Ehrman joins us now to discuss that Maryland squad. Jeff, as I told you before we started recording, I know with the 4-7 record, it's basketball season down in College Park now. It's starting to turn the page. But football is very much the focal point right now in Happy Valley, and Maryland represents the last stepping stone to punch their ticket for a long-awaited college football playoff berth. So thank you very much for hopping on board with us to break down this matchup from your perspective.
Sure. I appreciate you having me on, Tyler.
Let's begin with the fact that Maryland's not going bowling. Maryland is not looking all that competitive. It's a team that back-to-back seasons, 8 wins. The last 3 years finished with a bowl victory. Now they're 4-7. They've lost 4 consecutive games. Their only win in the Big Ten came against USC by 1 point back in October. So can you talk us through preseason expectations versus current reality here on Thanksgiving week?
Yeah, I think, preseason expectations where they'd win 6. I think the Vegas total wins was 6.5, which seemed fair given their recent success, but also given, the question marks about the team. The biggest one, at least from people who don't really study this stuff, being, losing Talia Tagovailoa, the Big Ten's all-time leading passer. As it's turned out, and as some of us kind of suspected, the bigger issues have been a brand new offensive line, 5 new starters, most of them with very little experience, if any, and then a defensive backs crew with, a lot of inexperience, specifically at cornerback. So, to no one, even if it had correctly been classified as a rebuilding season, I don't think anyone could have quite expected 4-7 overall, 1-7 in the Big Ten. But, it's just one of those years where nothing has really come together. Things have not gone right. They've lost 4 games in a row. And like you said, it's for Maryland fans, it's basketball season officially.
It felt like Tagovailoa was the quarterback down in College Park forever. Obviously, he's moved on now, and that's a big part of the process for Maryland, and that's why expectations were adjusted a bit. We saw Tagovailoa put up some serious numbers during his Maryland career. He had a really sharp performance in Beaver Stadium back in 2020 when Maryland pulled off a win. Nittany Lions got the better of him moving forward in this series. But beyond the quarterback position, what has really been the problematic situations? And I'm not saying that Billy Edwards, the quarterback, is the problem, but we knew that there might be a transitional period at quarterback for Maryland coming off Tagovailoa. What has kind of been the step back beyond that for this program?
Yeah, he's had his ups and downs. It's hard to, diagnose exactly how much of that is his fault just because of that offensive line and the lack of a running game. They really haven't gotten even beginning early in the year, there were some warning signs where they couldn't run the ball that well against teams like Villanova. You knew that there might be some problems, and it hasn't gotten any better since then. So he hasn't had a running game to lean on. The pass protection hasn't been great. He's been getting beat up, fairly regularly. He's still questionable as far as we know for this week. And so that's been a big issue. And then, obviously on the defensive side, they were expected to be, the front seven was expected to be one of their best in recent years. They brought back a ton of size and experience, and it hasn't played out that way, especially with the pass rush, which has been, very quiet. And then again, with those defensive backs who've struggled.
What is the reflection on Coach Mike Locksley? Year 6 for him at Maryland. As I said, a couple 8-win seasons that he's coming off of. This is clearly a step in the wrong direction. I know that they want to close with a recruiting class that's going to give them a step forward for the future, try to climb up that Big Ten ladder. But externally, perhaps even internally, what kind of egg is on the face of Locksley if they were to finish 4-8? And what does it mean for this offseason?
I think internally, at least in terms of job security, he's fine. He has a contract that runs through 2028, mostly guaranteed. They would owe him somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million if they would buy him out. Additionally, he is coming off the best run in about 15 years, 3 consecutive years of winning bowl games. So, when he took over the program in 2019, it was a mess on and off the field. They were losing games constantly. They had the Jordan McNair tragedy, the offensive lineman who died during following a heat stroke at a team workout, and then subsequent drama and firing of DJ Durkin. So he took over, a dumpster fire and has, brought it back to respectability. That said, those past 3 years of respectability, there haven't been this sort of marquee wins necessarily that get a fan base excited. So externally, clearly from the outside, you hear a lot of chirping from the fans right now.
Billy Edwards had been waiting in the wings for a while at Maryland's quarterback room. He steps up as starter this year. He's at about 2,800 passing yards, 65% completion, 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions on the season. I know that injuries have been a part of the process for him as well, as you alluded to earlier. But when he is out there, when he is operating the offense, what's the scouting report on Edwards? And can you give us a little insight on why this Maryland pass attack leads all Big Ten teams in yards per game, about 290 yards through the air per contest?
Yeah, they've devised an offense to accentuate, Ty Felton in the pass game. Obviously, he has, far more receptions and receiving yards than anyone in the Big Ten. So a chunk of Edwards' success has been on quick hitters to Felton, who's a yard after catch machine. But he's a really tough guy. He doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. He's got decent size, not the biggest guy or fastest guy, but he's just one of those classic kind of gamer quarterbacks that's not going to get rattled for the most part. He is going to make mistakes. Earlier in the year, there were very few turnovers. Recently, his accuracy hasn't been as good. There have been more turnovers. I'm sure some of that is related to him playing banged up. But, he's had a good year overall, at least statistically, leading passer in the Big Ten. Nobody could have predicted that. At the same time, some of that is due just to the fact that, again, they haven't had much of a running game, and they've been down in so many of these games that they've had to air it out.
You mentioned Ty Felton, big year he's put together, 48 catches last year. Jumps up to 92 catches thus far on the 2024 season at about 1,100 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns. Caden Prather, his stat line isn't much to sneeze at either. He's close to 60 catches on the season. Where else do we need to look in terms of playmakers within this Maryland offense who could give Penn State some problems?
The most established guy is Roman Hemby, the running back 2 years ago. He nearly rushed for 1,000 yards as a redshirt freshman. He's fallen off numbers-wise the past 2 years. Some of that, again, is the offensive line and the lack of, a cohesive running game, but he's a playmaker in both the run game and the passing game. And then they have a couple of tight ends who are really talented younger guys, Preston Howard and Dylan Wade. Especially Wade seems to make it, he seems to get 15 or 18 yards every time he touches the ball. So those are guys that they'll target. And then there's another kid named Octavian Smith, who's their third receiver, who was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, really highly regarded kid. Didn't do a lot the first couple of years. The question was whether he'd pan out, and during the past month or so, he started to come on as a more reliable playmaker.
Something I was interesting I picked up in some pregame prep here is when you look at Pro Football Focus's ratings, at least, in pass protection, Maryland ranks 132nd out of 134 teams across the FBS. And Obviously, they are very much leaning towards being a pass-first team with the numbers they've put up. What has that looked like over the course of this season? How frustrating has it been? And what's your prognosis for going up against the likes of Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton this Saturday in Happy Valley?
Yeah, it hasn't looked good. They've been in his face frequently. He's gotten rid of the ball fairly quickly for the most part, so the sack numbers don't necessarily illustrate what the pass blocking has been like. But they've got a bunch of guys again who hadn't played before. 5 new starters, a couple transfers. They lost one transfer, Isaiah Wright from Buffalo, before the season to an injury. They thought he might be their best offensive lineman, so that hurt. So it hasn't been good. He has a lot of passes batted down. That's been a frequent thing. I'm not sure I've seen a quarterback have as many passes batted down during one season. And with Penn State's defense, they're going to have to get it out of there quick and try to find some way to establish at least some semblance of a running game to keep him upright, assuming that he's healthy enough to play.
What do we need to know about Maryland's defense? I know on the season they ranked 15th of 18 in the Big Ten for total defense, but strengths, weaknesses, and perhaps some playmakers who could turn momentum against Penn State's offense.
Yeah, their defensive coordinator, Brian Williams, looked like the rising star first couple of years. Numbers all shot up higher than, better than they've been pretty much during most of their previous 9 seasons in the Big Ten. This year, it's taken a nosedive. How much of that is personnel? It's hard to say. We thought, like I said, the front 7 we thought would be good. The linebackers are pretty good. They've got a couple guys, Ruben Hippolyte and Caleb Wheatland, who are pretty nasty back there, make a lot of plays. And they've got some good safeties in Dante Trader. They've got a good, Glenn Miller is a ball-hawking cornerback who was earlier this season was, first in the country in interceptions. But other than that, when you're playing true freshman corners in the Big Ten, that's tough unless they are absolute, high 4-star, 5-star kind of recruits. And that's shown up time and again. So, it's been bad. It's been, their worst defense in several years. A lot better probably against the run than the pass, but, it just hasn't held up.
Outside the top 100 nationally in pass defense, we'll see what Drew Aller and Andy Kotelnicki and crew do about that on Saturday. 2 topics that we tend to look past sometimes on game weeks. I don't want to skip them on our discussion here. What's the story on Maryland special teams in 2024? And then in terms of injuries that you're gauging here and over the course of the week and going to be keeping tabs on during pregame, anything we should be aware of that could be particularly impactful for this matchup?
Well, I feel like I'm just dumping on them one after another, but it is what it is. Special teams have not been good. The kick coverage, return teams haven't been good. Their kicker, Jack Howes, was inconsistent last year. They hoped he would come along this year, and that really hasn't happened. He has the leg. He'll hit a 50-yarder, but then he'll miss a crucial 40-yarder. Really, the only saving grace of the special teams has been Bryce McPherson, a punter who transferred from Notre Dame. He's been one of the better punters in the Big Ten. Otherwise, special teams have been a very weak spot for them. Injury-wise, really just Billy Edwards is the biggest question right now. Otherwise, most of their guys have remained relatively healthy.
If Edwards is unable to go or he's limited, who do we need to keep an eye on coming off the bench?
Yeah, that would be M.J. Morris, transfer from NC State. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of Georgia a few years ago. A lot of people assumed he would win the starting job just because he had more, name value, so to speak, more prestige surrounding him as a recruit. Edwards won the quarterback competition easily. You can see why. Morris played last week when Edwards left the game. He actually did throw a couple of touchdown passes and had some good moments, but also had his share of struggles. So if it's him, I think that you might see a little bit more QB run kind of thing, and just hope that he doesn't make the same kind of mistakes.
Let's finish with this, Jeff. I know you don't sound very high on the Terps right now at this stage of the year, but Maryland can threaten an upset in Beaver Stadium if, and ultimately, what's your prediction for this matchup, how it plays out on Saturday afternoon?
So they can threaten if Stephon Diggs and DJ Moore suit up on offense. And I mean, I can't see it. it's the end of a long year. You know how it goes with teams that are struggling at this point, especially with the transfer portal and so many guys starting to figure out what their plans are for the offseason. Coaching staff has to be wondering also what lies ahead. There's no bowl eligibility to be motivated by, so and obviously it's a mismatch on paper as well statistically. So it would be pretty stunning. You never know, but Penn State would have to come in pretty flat, I think, to give them a chance.
And do you have a score you're thinking of at this point in the week?
Yeah, I'll say Penn State 42. I mean, Penn State puts up huge numbers pretty much every year in this matchup, and the defense isn't better at Maryland this year than it has been the last few years. So, I'll say Penn State 45, Maryland 20, something in that range.
We appreciate it, Jeff. And there have been some lopsided scores in this series lately. A 30-0 win last time they were at Beaver Stadium. Penn State taking that in 2022, and then last year down at College Park, Penn State won 51-15. Nittany Lions have a 3-game win streak in this series. 43-3-1 all-time record against Maryland. Jeff, we appreciate it. I hope you enjoy basketball season, but we do appreciate you hopping on here to talk some Terps football. Take care. Enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Same to you, Ty.
We continue this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast with focus on what's happening here in Happy Valley, where the number 4 Penn State Nittany Lions look to punch their ticket to the playoffs this Saturday, mid-afternoon matchup against Maryland. It's going to be a cold one. 20s, low 30s is the forecast. So it's going to be definitely more winter than fall feel, which is fitting because we're about to get into some December football action, and Penn State hopes to be a part of it. Maryland comes in, as you just heard, 4 straight losses. They've got some uncertainty at quarterback. The Terps do have 2 wins in Beaver Stadium as a Big Ten member going back to 2014. But you look at the series, a lot of lopsided matchups in it in favor of Penn State. And in case you missed our Monday episode, I want to remind you, a recruiting insider, Tyler Cavaruso, joined us to break down this Maryland recruiting guest list, talk about some flip targets because we're just a week away from that early signing period. But we're going to jump into a lot of game-centric conversation now with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. One note for our listeners out there, normally when we do our preview episode, it's Thursday. We've already seen Penn State practice. We've already heard from James Franklin for the second time this week. With Thanksgiving landing on this week, we're recording on a Wednesday. We're still a couple hours from getting over to the practice field. So we don't have the latest in terms of player availability. There are a few players, as we'll get to, that we're going to be monitoring on the field after they were either limited or unavailable against Minnesota. But just keep that in mind. Head over to Lions247.com sometime between now and kickoff for the latest on what we saw, our complete practice notebook, our photo galleries. And before we get any further, it is a VIP practice notebook, Mark, and all the recruiting coverage that's leading up to this matchup and coming out of it, going into signing day, going to be VIP content. And so I'm setting you up. Black Friday is just around the corner. I know a lot of people have a list of things they want to get for Christmas. If you're a Penn State fan or you know a Penn State fan, we've got a great opportunity for you to get a full year of insider access at Lions247.com.
Yeah, it used to be that the regular season ended and then nothing happened for, until the bowl practices. And then signing day was in February. Coaches would take some time off. You'd have some visits and whatnot. Not anymore. I mean, I was going through, guys, what's coming up on the football front. And it's going to be the craziest December I can remember, with respect to what's happening in recruiting and college football playoff and portal and everything. So we're offering a Black Friday special. It'll extend to Cyber Monday, 75% off VIP. If you were waiting to get on board, now is the perfect time. It comes out to less than 8 cents per day. I mean, you're going to pay $24 total roughly, and you will get your value out of that in the next month. And just so people know, obviously Saturday, last day of November, Penn State versus Maryland, all sorts of recruiting coverage out of that. December 1st, the next day, what happens? Coaching carousel, right? I mean, we're not necessarily projecting anything, but you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen at other schools that could impact, Penn State. NFL draft decisions are going to start happening. Unbelievably, next Wednesday is signing day. I mean, you used to be able to breathe. You can't breathe now as a writer or as a fan. And then we get into the following December 7th, Big Ten championship game. Will Penn State be there? Probably not, but there's an opportunity. And if they're there, we'll be there. And then obviously December 8th, college football playoff selection. We're going to be interested in that. And December 9th, what happens? NCAA transfer portal opens. I mean, so it is absolute craziness. We will have a lot of free coverage, but a lot of it will be VIP. A lot of the stuff that Tyler Calvaruso and Brian Doan do for us is VIP. The practice reports that we put together, you guys do the bulk of the heavy lifting on that. VIP. Discussions on the message board, VIP. 75% off. It's the greatest time to do it. It's our best value of the year. So we don't often push this heavily on the pod. We'll throw it down there on your little ticker at the bottom, Tyler, and I may make a comment or two, but this really is the best value you're going to get all year. And I just want to wrap it up by making a bold prediction right now. You said that you hope to have this segment done in about 20 minutes. There is zero chance that this is going to be done in 20 minutes.
20 minutes starting now. All right,
okay.
Daniel.
And that's half my fault for taking up all that time with the promo, but honest to goodness, people. And listen, for all of our subscribers who are already on board, thank you so much. If you are no longer on a promotional package, you're eligible for Paramount Plus. So make sure that you get that taken care of. But remember, if you're on a promotional package, and if I could explain this really quickly, and I know I'm making fun of you for going too long, and I'm the one that's making it go too long, but the reason we don't offer P Plus for the people who are on the promotional deals is because for years we had people saying, hey, I've been paying full boat forever. What do I get out of it? What you get out of it is free Paramount Plus. So that's why we do it the way we do, so people understand. So if you're not on board, come on board for 75% off. After that year's over, it's going to take you through next year at this time, free P Plus.
We appreciate your consideration. Big December ahead, but this has you covered all through next November. So just imagine the kind of coverage you'll be ready to get at a very discounted rate. And Daniel, as much as we're excited to get into December and there's going to be a lot to deal with that month, November's got to finish out. And the way it's going to finish out is Penn State determining where it stands in the college football playoff conversation. We know the Big Ten championship game is still a possibility. Penn State needs Ohio State to lose to Michigan. They've got to handle their business against Maryland. They would get in on a tiebreaker against Indiana based on opponents who here in Big Ten play and their win percentage. That's great. But I think ultimately, Daniel, focuses on those playoffs. So can you set the table for us where Penn State stands, who they might be looking at in round one, where they might play in round one going into game 12?
Yeah, I think for Penn State, you look at these college football playoff rankings for the past 3 weeks and not much has changed. And I think that when you talk about how volatile college football has been over these past couple of weeks, that's a good place to be. Penn State was number 4 for the third straight week of the college football playoff rankings. They were number 6 in the debut after the Ohio State game, then moved up and have stayed there. And the way that those rankings work in terms of the seeding formula, that would put Penn State in as the number 6 seed, which means a home game at Beaver Stadium. And this time it would be against Indiana. We've seen SEC opponents in there for the past couple of weeks. I think Georgia last week, Ole Miss the week before. But that's how things are sorting out. I know that I've seen some chatter of well, there's no way the committee would have a Big Ten versus Big Ten matchup in the first round. This is just completely based off of the rankings that the committee released last night. I think once you get to that final set of rankings, then maybe you'll see some of the finagling and, maybe manipulating things a little bit to get, the matchup distribution that you would want. We'll see if any other teams pop up in that 20 to 25 range to help boost some resumes.
Daniel, are you suggesting the committee might work backwards, figuring out a matchup and then finding its way to get to that matchup? I can't believe you.
I would never accuse a television show of trying to boost its ratings, and I would never do that. It's a tangent, but I felt like that was Northwestern's job for the past couple of years, where if they weren't a bad team, they were always in that number 25 to help Ohio State or Michigan up top. But we'll see. I think that we still have one more weekend of regular season games. I think everyone's still waiting to find out how much the conference championship matchups kind of matter, how penalized will you be if you lose. We all know that if you win, you likely get a top 4 seed and a first round bye into the quarterfinals. But there's a lot of this where we're still learning. But I think Penn State is in a good spot. I know that there was some chatter about Notre Dame leapfrogging them. Personally, I didn't really know why or see reasoning for that when you compare the resumes beyond just the fact that Notre Dame's loss is Northern Illinois and Penn State's loss is Ohio State. But Penn State's in a good spot right now, and it just goes back to taking care of business. That's what it's going to be. I think that they've done a really nice job of staying clear of the messiness of that 7 to 14 range, and the teams in there that are deserving, teams there that are playing well, people using whatever criteria they want to try to boost the team they think belongs. But we'll see. There's one more weekend for Penn State to really lock things up.
You said they got to handle business. Mark's been saying that since the Ohio State game ended, and that's their path to the playoff. And if they do on Saturday, they would get to 11 wins for the first time under James Franklin. This is season number 11 for him, and they would be very well positioned to be at home in Beaver Stadium the weekend before Christmas against an opponent to be determined later. And I spoke a little bit with Kobe King, defensive captain this week, about the potential to earn another home game, an 8th one on the schedule in 2024. And he said it would be cold, but it would be a heck of a time. I think everybody on this team can kind of start to imagine a little bit what that might look like, but they got 60 minutes of regular season action to finish things out. And by the way, we'll know where things stand with that Big Ten championship situation before kickoff, because Ohio State, Michigan play at noon. If Ohio State wins, it's Ohio State versus Oregon. If they don't, then all of a sudden all bets are off, and Penn State could punch its ticket to play the Ducks. Whether you think that's a good idea for this team or not is open for debate. The conference championships and college football playoff conversation have kind of collided lately. Looking at this matchup, guys, we heard it from Jeff Ehrman a little bit earlier. And full transparency, we spoke with him on Tuesday. It's now Wednesday, and since then, Mike Loxley, Maryland's head coach, has had a chance to meet with media following a Tuesday practice session, and he did say that quarterback Billy Edwards is definitely banged up. He said he's been banged up all year. He referenced the back surgery Maryland's quarterback had during the offseason. Now it's a thumb issue. They tried to give it a go last week. He didn't last the entire matchup. MJ Morris came in. He's a guy who spent his first 2 college seasons at NC State, had some success there, ultimately transferred out, 7 starts in those 2 seasons with the Wolfpack. So if he is to step up and play this game, MJ Morris isn't exactly a complete stranger to power conference action. But yet, Daniel, you're a Maryland alum. You know that oftentimes it gets dicey late in the season for this program, even when they start strong. This is an example of things going awry pretty fast for Maryland this year. 1 win in Big Ten action. You throw on top the fact that they have a quarterback question mark right now. Billy Edwards has helped this team produce the most successful pass attack in Big Ten play based on yards per game. And yet we don't know if he's going to be able to throw. The thumb's pretty important part of the job as a QB. So what do you make of kind of the conundrum this Maryland team faces in a few different ways, but starting with their trigger man facing this Penn State defense?
Yeah, it's a tough time of year for Maryland. I put it in my pick online, and I have the notebook that I tabulated it on in front of me right now. Since they joined the Big Ten, they're 9-32 in November. And I know that if you were to take that even further back to like 2011-ish, it would look even worse. I know that they were 0-8 in November in their first 2 years under Randy Edsall, and 11-12. They've won 2 games in November, only in 2023 and 2014. And of those 9 wins, 5 of those are against Rutgers. So that's kind of the pool that Maryland has swum in the Big Ten, especially when you get to this time of year. But this is where depth and the overall strength of your program can really shine through. And you look at Maryland and what's been happening up along the offensive line, and then you look at how that affects the quarterback and maybe some of the questions that leads to there. It's a long season. 12 games, that's a lot to get through. You start practicing in July, so it's just a long time, and you get to this point. And if you're one of those programs that doesn't necessarily have the same infrastructure and depth as that upper tier, these teams that we're talking about for the college football playoff, it gets really difficult. But the quarterback situation is interesting to monitor. I know that MJ Morris, when he entered the transfer portal last year out of NC State, there's a decent amount of fanfare surrounding him, and he was a little bit of a buzzy name. I believe he was pretty well regarded as a recruit when he signed at NC State. And so when he came in, you've got 2 guys looking to replace your all-time leading passer in Talia Tungavailoa, who had some very nice success at Maryland. It was interesting to see Billy Edwards win that job, hold on to it, and help Maryland out to one of their patented 3-1 starts through September. So we'll see. I think that you look at where we are in the time of year, they're 4-7. Their streak of 3 straight bowl trips is most likely going to be snapped. And so it's a tough spot for that program. And that starts at quarterback when you have an injury question.
We'll get to the differentiating factor of motivation in this matchup on a cold day this Saturday and what that might mean. But Mark, we still have some Penn State injuries to sort through. While Maryland tries to figure out who its quarterback is going to be, there's a few different spots in the field that maybe we'll have a little more clarity after getting to the practice field here on a Wednesday evening. And if we do, we'll bring that to Lions247.com. But 4 positions I want to present you with, Mark, and tell me which one has you on highest alert to finish the regular season. At right tackle, Anthony Donko is out long-term. We're expecting Nolan Rucci to step up like he did last week. JB Nelson is another possibility at tackle now. Defensive tackle, you're down to 3 proven experienced veterans there. Hakeem Beamon left the program earlier this month, and then Alonzo Ford was lost long-term with an injury last week. At receiver, Julian Fleming traveled to Minnesota, warmed up. He only got in for 1 snap after being listed questionable. They only went with 3 wide receivers at Minnesota. And then at cornerback, Elliott Washington, been a staple of that secondary all season long. He was injured at Purdue. He was out against Minnesota, and we'll see if he's on the practice field. So 4 different spots there, Mark. Which one has you thinking which one has you thinking it could be a rough go of it for Penn State more than the others?
I don't think it'll be a rough go in this game, but I think long term, I'm looking at right tackle. And, one of the reasons I say that is I like what Nolan Rucci brings, but I don't think he's operating at the same level. And then when I specifically asked James Franklin after the whole Thanksgiving meal interaction, how does this kind of change the ladder, the kind of the pecking order? He mentioned, I think, every offensive lineman on the roster. I mean, the domino effect there, and I'm only half joking there. I mean, he mentioned a lot of different players, so it seems like they're not completely comfortable with what that situation is. And again, I don't think that's not necessarily a knock on Rucci, but they have to figure out who's going to go where. So if you put JB Nelson there, what does that do to the interior? He's mentioning Egan Boyer, as a true freshman, and Cooper Cousins, who's been an interior guy. So it just seems to me, typically when we ask him those questions, he'll mention a couple names, but not go through the whole list like that. With defensive tackle, for this game, I think they're going to be okay because I think some of the younger guys will be able to step up. And unless Michigan wins, I think they would have the luxury, if they had to, you probably hope that you don't have to, of playing your starters a few more snaps than regular. Ideally, if you're winning by enough that you can get Zane Durant and Devon out of there, Devon J. Thomas out of there, great. But if not, if you're looking at 3 weeks until your next game, I think you could afford to give them a little bit more action. Cornerback, I think they're fine. And wide receiver, I think what we've seen them do is offset enough of that with their talent at tight end that, they've basically been doing that all year. So Julian Fleming, as good as he's been as a blocker and that sort of thing, it's not as if he's been a high productivity catch guy. So I think they have enough options there. So to me, that right tackle, the offensive line has been playing well most of the season. But to me, he's been one of your better offensive linemen, if not your best offensive lineman. And I think that's going to be the trickiest one to kind of solve.
The silver lining is here. You're not bringing a lineman off the bench cold. You got Nolan Rucci, who's I think got 6 games under his belt with at least 25 snaps this season. He didn't have much experience in 3 years at Wisconsin, so that's changed this fall in a significant way. He's been around since January. He was tasked with battling Anthony Donko. Both of those linemen have told us in recent weeks and months that they both benefited from that competition. But I think the stark contrast here that we have witnessed, and when you look at some of the grades out there, is on the run game. And that's where you wonder when it comes down to it, and you need to run the ball. And James Franklin likes to say, everyone in the stadium knows you need a yard. Can you pick it up? When you're swapping out Anthony Donko, arguably been their best run blocker this year, for Nolan Rucci, who I think has serious strides to make in that department. you do wonder how that matches up. And I'm with you, Mark. I'd say that's the spot. But against Maryland, there really aren't any excuses for any of these situations to derail you, put you in a bad situation. But Daniel, when you look at Penn State's offensive matchup against this Maryland defense, Maryland doesn't do anything exceptionally well defensively. They've really struggled to get turnovers during Big Ten play. They're second to last in the Big Ten in surrendering passing yards, about 250 per game. They're more middle of the pack when it comes to the rush defense. But when you think about Drew Aller and company trying to put this one away early, trying to handle that business, what are the keys that you pick up?
Yeah, I think that you want to be able to exploit Maryland through the air, like plenty of other teams have done this year. But at the same time, that Maryland has shown that teams can grind them down. You look at what Iowa did to them last week with Caleb Johnson getting 35 carries. That game was essentially just on the ground for Iowa, and so it can be done. I think when you talk about taking care of business, getting out of there with keeping guys healthy, you probably don't want to expose Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to too many potentially unnecessary hits, even with a bit of a break coming up. But you've got both Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, where you don't have to worry about redshirt anymore. You can use those guys and turn them loose at this point. So we'll see what that looks like. I mean, it's tough when you look at the forecast. It's not necessarily conducive to the idea of airing it out, in cold temps and everything like that. But at the same time, we know that Drew Aller can take some shots. They took a deep shot at Minnesota, a couple deep shots at Minnesota last week, and another day where the forecast wasn't necessarily the best. So I think the Penn State offense is in a good position. They did put up 51 points on this team a year ago in College Park. And I think that they should be in position to at least control things, dictate the terms of the matchup on the offensive side of the ball, both through the air and on the ground.
They put up some big point totals in a few matchups against Maryland during the last decade or so. We'll see if they can do that again. Mark, defensively, Penn State's facing a Maryland squad that, again, they're number one in the Big Ten in passing statistics, but a lot of that is because they've had to play from behind. They don't trust their ground game. And at the same time, they're throwing the ball a lot. They're not protecting their quarterback too well. That's why it's been a tough go for Billy Edwards. He might not be available in this matchup. If MJ Morris is out there, he's probably going to have to fight for himself in the pocket too. I mentioned this earlier when Jeff Erman was on with us, but 132 out of 134 in Pro Football Focus's pass protection grades for FBS programs. And they're taking on a team that happens to feature Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter at the edge rusher positions and other weapons there. So when you examine this matchup, regardless of who's at quarterback for Maryland, what's the blueprint for dominance from Penn State perspective?
Yeah, you mentioned it, but I wanted to go over it. Maryland trailed Iowa 16-0, Oregon 29-10, USC 21-7, and Northwestern 17-0. So when you look at why they're leading the Big Ten in passing, it's because they have to. And I think that's the key for Penn State. I mean, you have to just dominate the run game, which they should be able to do, and that should open things up for your pass rushers to get there. I think the fact that, James Franklin said Dennis Sutton seems to be rounding back into top form is important. With all due respect to Amin Vanover and Smith Vilbert, I don't think they're nearly the same pass rushing team with both of those guys on the field as they are when you're able to pair Abdul Carter with Dennis Sutton. So, yeah, I think it just speaks to that. And that's where maybe you will get some of these young defensive tackles some snaps and some good work where they're able to help control the ground game. But I think this sets up ideally for Penn State. We mentioned it last week, even though Minnesota played relatively well, it's going to be tough for one-dimensional teams to beat this defense. And I don't think Maryland is about as one-dimensional as it gets. Some teams in the Big Ten, I guess, are zero-dimensional, but this is going to be, I think, set up really well for Penn State with respect to ultimately getting to the quarterback. I think it may be reflected in somebody's bold predictions too. We'll see.
It's a test for this defensive secondary, but it may also be an opportunity for this defensive secondary to get their hands on the ball. Again, you don't know what the quarterback situation is going to look like for Maryland. You don't know what kind of desperation the Terps might be dealing with, but they like to throw it deep to their receivers. They like to find their receivers. Ty Felton, far and away the leader in the Big Ten, 92 catches, almost 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. And then Caden Prather should be a familiar name for Penn State fans from his recruiting days, wrapping up his Maryland career, 55 catches, 599 yards, 3 touchdowns. So they have had high volume target opportunities. We'll see what that looks like if they need to go that route against this Penn State secondary, because we haven't seen the Nittany Lions secondary get exposed all that much. And they've been shutting down doors for a lot of the season. Motivation, I think, is worth addressing here, because we know Penn State has its biggest goals to play for. They got to get 1-0 this week. They've got to live up to that mantra, handle business against Maryland. And I think it's fair to wonder, Mark, whether Maryland really wants to be here on Saturday. It's going to be very cold. Their head coach isn't getting fired, but their head coach is in a spot where people are really wondering about the trajectory of this program. A lot of these players aren't going to be with the program next year, or they're going to try to bring in guys to replace them. And when you've lost 4 in a row, you haven't won in the Big Ten since mid-October, and now you're taking on a Penn State team that the last couple of times you played them just took you to the woodshed. I think it's fair to wonder, when they run out of the tunnel, hear those boos in Beaver Stadium, will they be ready to match the energy that Penn State is expected to bring?
Yeah, I just don't see it happening. Daniel would probably know better than I would, because he was actually at the last game where they looked like a decent team. They kind of rallied to beat USC, which was a nice win for them at the time. And I think Daniel may have been in the middle of the field storming there. I don't quite know. I'm kidding. Daniel was not in the middle of the field storming, but he was at the game. But yeah, I just find it hard to see where they're going to come out and play with that sort of motivation. If I could, I'd like to ask Daniel a question, because I know he follows this much more as a Maryland grad, but a lot of people just assume that Loxley should be on the hot seat or on the chopping block, or however you want to say it. Why is he not, Daniel?
I mean, I think you look at what he's done over the course of his 6 years. I mean, it is kind of crazy to think that it's year 6 with them. But you look, I mean, he took them to 3 straight bowl games, which hadn't been done since, I think, the first 3 years of the Friedgen tenure in the early 2000s. And he also took over after the mess that was DJ Durkin, the death of Jordan McNair, everything that went along with that. And I think that Maryland, they went with someone familiar, someone who could be a steady hand, someone who knew the lay of the land coming in after that kind of situation. And I think that he's brought a lot of stability there. I think, the on-field results are getting there. I think that you look at this year as a bit of a missed opportunity, because you talk about a team like Penn State benefiting from divisions going away. Maryland, Rutgers, like those types of schools, Indiana, like they were the ones that were probably even more even bigger beneficiaries of it. And Maryland, I think, missed an opportunity. But I think that Loxley has brought in some talent. Malik Washington, who I believe is probably a familiar name to some of our listeners from the recruiting trail. 4-star quarterback coming in next year, local kid from Archbishop Spalding. There's a lot of excitement around him. I know that my friends that I talk to a lot are excited about him. And so I think that you look at where Maryland was at the end of the Randy Edsall tenure and the couple years of DJ Durkin and Matt Canada and where they are now, I think that overall they're probably in a better place. But I think that it's one of those things that Maryland and a ton of other schools across the country are looking at right now in terms of their place in the sport, in terms of resources and what your ceiling actually is. It's a tough spot to be in. And I think that with Loxley, I think what you're going to get, and there's some value to that.
You mentioned Malik Washington, and by the way, Penn State's going to be hosting a 2025 quarterback, a top 24/7 one at that, on campus this Saturday. Go over to Lions247.com for the latest from Tyler Calvaruso. But Malik Washington's just the latest example. Loxley seems to get a guy or two in the home state. He has tremendous connections with the high school recruits, with the high school coaches, more importantly. So I think there's a fear that if Maryland were to push the reset button, they're going to be resetting their recruiting connections and their networking across the region. And that's a scary proposition for them. But it is hard to always sold on the future, the next piece that's coming in. And outside of Tualila Tagovailoa coming to campus and putting up more yards than anyone's seen in Big Ten history, you just wonder how much that had to do with the success. And now that he's gone, I think next year, though, Mark, as a non-Maryland guy, I think next year, if they don't get a bounce back, then it's going to be a major question mark. I think it's enough time on Maryland. Let's get into some players to watch and our score predictions, and we'll go right back to you, Daniel. Who is your Penn State player to watch on Saturday?
I'm going to go with A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber, Penn State's top cornerback duo, Tyler, you brought up Ty Felton and the numbers that he's put up. Caden Prather is, his numbers aren't quite in the same neighborhood as Felton, who they really fed early this year. But I remember last year Prather had one of the better catches I've seen in person, I believe, in this game down in College Park. And so, that he can be dangerous. I think that'll be a fun matchup. And if you think this game will go the way that we expect it to, Maryland, whether it's Billy Edwards or MJ Morris, they're probably going to have to throw if they want to have a chance in this game. And so I think that we can see a lot of AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber matched up against maybe two of the better wide receivers that we've seen this year. And I think that could be a fun matchup for us to watch.
Mark, who you got in the spotlight?
I'm going to go with Bo Pribula. I think you'll see him do some things in the running game relatively early, maybe score a touchdown in a goal line situation. And then if the game goes as expected, he'll get an opportunity. And we've seen that Franklin likes to get him the opportunity to actually throw the ball, and Andy Kotelnicki. So I could see him doing some good things if that Maryland defense is pretty tired in the second half. So I'm going with Big Bo.
I'm going to go to the backfield, too, on offense. I'll say Katron Allen. I think it may have been last week or the week before I brought up Nick Singleton as the player to watch. I think you have seen the positive strides. We talked about that on Monday. James Franklin opened up about it as well, saying he's getting healthier. He's getting closer to 100%. There's one running back trending in the right direction at the right time. Can they get another going? Because Katron Allen hasn't been Mr. Reliable. I know we've called him that all offseason. You know what you're going to get from Katron Allen. Not so much this year, guys. He's averaging 4.5 yards per carry, which isn't really anything to sneeze at, but he was right on 5.2 yards per carry as a freshman and as a sophomore. You look in 5 of the last 7 games, he's under 4 yards per carry. That's not Katron Allen so you wonder, is this something where he can regain his footing? Can he show off some of that physicality? Can he turn a 2-yard gain into a 5-yard gain like we were so accustomed to seeing? Because it just hasn't been as consistent with that. Look at last week against Minnesota. I think he's coming into this game maybe with something to prove. He didn't touch the ball in the first half. He ended up gaining 14 yards on his first 2 carries. In his next 5 attempts, his final 5 attempts of the game, he lost 4 yards. So I think it's important. If you got number 10 going, can you get number 13 revved up now going into the postseason? We know what it's like when they can feed off each other, but it feels like this year it's either been one guy's been going or the other guy's been going. And really got to go back to that Illinois game, the Big Ten opener in late September, where it felt like they were a true tandem 1-2 punch that was a problem for an opponent. So that's where I land on it. Let's go to our predictions of both the bold variety and the score variety, and we're back to you, Mark.
Yeah, we have some pretty wide margins in our expert score predictions. I am not going to go super wide, even though James Franklin has seemed to take a measure of pleasure in beating the bejesus out of his former employer. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think there's going to be a big picture. Despite the 1-0 mentality, I do think you have to look at things kind of big picture, and that entails 2 things. Number one, if somehow Michigan manages to win, you have to be ready that you're going to play in a week. So if you're able to get a lead, I don't think you're going to see them have the starters in there late and just stomping on the accelerator. The other thing is, as bumped up as they are, even if you have the chance to really roll it up, I think they take it easy. Don't risk anybody else getting hurt. I don't think at this point, from what we've seen of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, I don't think there's going to be anything gained by winning by 40 as opposed to 28. So I am going with 28, 38-10, Penn State. My bold prediction, going a little bit opposite of you, Tyler. Last time Nick Singleton played against the Terrapins, 8 carries, 20 yards. I think Nick Singleton is going to eclipse 20 yards in the first drive and maybe even on a single carry. He will have at least 1 20-yard plus carry in the game at some point.
That's a good one. I thought you were going to say on his first carry because that would have been the boldest, but we'll take the bold.
I'll go and say that. Okay, let's see. And then this way, if it happens, it'll be great. But I'm sure Loxley's watching this and saying, if we do anything, that Nick Singleton is not going to. So run play action when Singleton's in there. Run play action on the first play, because I'm sure all the coaches are watching this podcast. They're probably sitting at home on Thanksgiving watching this as we speak.
Yeah, the annual Mike Loxley household tradition of seeing what Mark Brennan has to say about his team before the matchup. Daniel, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, on the blowout front, I pulled up the post that I did from after the Kent State game to look up the top 10 blowouts of of the James Franklin era. And you do have Maryland on here twice, at number 2 in 2017, 66-3, and at number 4 in 2019, 59-0. If they would want to get into the top 10 again, they would need at least a 45-point margin. I don't see that happening. Kind of like how Mark laid out. This is a game that this can be kind of a getaway game for you almost, where if you get out to that lead, depending on if you're playing next week or in 3 weeks, you can manage guys, get to the finish line in that way. So I think that I don't necessarily know that we'll see it run up like it has in the past. At the same time, we know that when those backups are in, James Franklin wants them to execute, wants them to run the offense. So I have a final score of 45-13. I think it'll follow a little bit of a similar game script where maybe it's a little tight early. Maybe there's a little bit of a slow start, a back and forth, but then, like I talked about earlier, that depth, that talent will really start to be borne out as we go across the day. I do think Maryland could be plucky early. I know we talk about the overall team motivation for where the program is, but I think you look at individual players, like Nick Dawkins brought it up this week, where he said he knows a lot of guys on this team. There's a lot of relationships there. I'm sure there will be individuals motivated to make plays, to maybe prove something. Maybe Mike Loxley is motivated to prove something against James Franklin, but I think Penn State will win out in the end. Bold prediction, Abdul Carter is now a finalist for the Bednarik Award, Lombardi Award, and Nagurski Trophy. This is going to be his last chance to really put something on film, to get to some round numbers. He's at 17.5 tackles for loss and 8 sacks. I think by the time Saturday is over, he has 20 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. Maryland's tackles have struggled a little bit this year. A couple more familiar names in Andre Roy and Alan Herron. I think there's a third backup that they've gone to in recent weeks too. But I think we're going to have a big game for Abdul Carter, and he'll solidify his candidacy for some of those awards.
We have not seen a Penn State player get 10 sacks since 2015, so that would be a significant feat. It's only fitting, Daniel, that we close out the regular season with Penn State scoring the same amount of points. I also have them getting to 45 points. I got Maryland at 10 in this case, so a 35-point spread for the home squad. I just don't have any faith that Maryland is going to come into this game and be ready to match punches. I just think if they take a couple early, I don't know if they get back off the canvas. And I think that's collectively, not saying individually like you referenced, Daniel, but I think they're going to need a collective, cohesive effort to go toe-to-toe with this Penn State team and make it a 4-quarter game. I don't see that happening. I think turnovers are going to be a big storyline for Maryland. I think they're going to be in a situation where they've got to air the ball out as they have every week. This Penn State secondary can take advantage of that. The pass rush can take advantage of that. And ultimately, I just don't think the ground game is going to be enough of a factor for Maryland to have any stability and balance. So I could see 3-4 turnovers perhaps over the course of this day. From a bold prediction standpoint, I will go to the freshman class because I expect a 35-point margin. I expect to see some freshmen on the field. I think we'll get 2 touchdowns from that freshman class. Through 11 games, they have scored 1 combined touchdown. That belongs to Luke Reynolds a couple weeks ago at Purdue. I think Reynolds will get into the end zone again. And then probably one of those running backs, Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, but 2 freshmen get into the end zone, and then 1 gets his hand on a takeaway. I think I called that shot a couple weeks ago when they played Purdue, but I think in this time, one of those freshman defenders will be involved in forcing a fumble, picking up a fumble, grabbing an interception, something like that. So a glimpse toward the future, and then the present reality would be an 11-1 Penn State squad waiting for its postseason opportunity. So, guys, we'll be back in the press box on Saturday for this matchup. I don't think it'll be our last time at Beaver Stadium this season, but we'll find out soon enough. I hope you both have a great Thanksgiving. I know Daniel's on the move for his. We're going to get together over at the Penn State practice field on Wednesday before everyone goes their separate ways and starts to feast. But check out our coverage over at Lions247.com Wednesday evening into Thursday and all through the remainder of this week. A few more storylines for this matchup, a bunch coming off the practice field, and keep an eye on all that recruiting content coming your way. Big quarterback added to the list, and it's a list that continues to grow for Saturday. We are 1 week from National Signing Day, and you can jump on board 75% off at Lions247.com. All right, guys, happy holidays. Thanks for the time.
Happy holidays to all of our viewers and subscribers and visitors to the site, too.
Happy Thanksgiving.
That'll be it for us. This is the Lions 24/7 podcast.